Student housing is such a unique industry. The more unique an industry is, the more important it is for that industry to have a resource and a platform to share ideas and data, to determine best practices, and a platform to simply promote networking among the professionals in that industry. That's what we are setting out to provide with Student Housing Insight. But what's even more unique about the student housing industry is how unique those professionals are. They want to make a positive impact on the students and the university communities they serve. They understand they have an opportunity to touch the future. They come to work every day looking for ways to make that future bright. If you're one of those people, come be a part of Student Housing Insight. Well, what's up, everyone? Hopefully that earlier countdown video got everybody into the holiday mood, and happy holidays to you guys and a happy new year that is on the way. If you could, in the chat, if you can confirm with me that you can hear me, that would be fantastic. So guys, welcome to today's Shop Talk for Thursday, December 19th. This is obviously the last one for 2024. I want to go over a couple of housekeeping items really quick. First of all, we want this to be interactive. This is the monthly webinar for the student housing industry for the United States, and we've got folks from all across the country who are joining in. So want to make sure that we know where you're coming from and what city you're in, what markets you're in. So please put that in the chat. You can do that over in the right-hand side of the screen if you haven't found that already. And we also want you to ask questions of our panel. So if you want to put a question in the chat, just put a Q in front of it so that I know to start and come back and be able to share it. Because sometimes chat will get a little bit crazy. I think that's it on the housekeeping side. Again, welcome. My name is Wesley Dees. I never even explained who I am. So if you're new to this for the first time, I am the CEO of Student Housing Insight, and we run this monthly Shop Talk webinar. It's typically the second Thursday of every month. We're doing it on the third Thursday. I believe it's the third Thursday. Yeah, because we had LeaseCon TurnCon last week in Charlotte, and so we had to put everything off for a week. So really quick, this is typically the time we bring in Dave Borzos with NMHC. He sent me a message about an hour or so ago that he has lost his voice and cannot be on today. So make sure you if you know Dave, make sure you send him a get well soon email and let him know that we missed him today. So because of that, we will not be having a policy and legislative update. So let's go ahead and jump into kind of the main event here. Charlie, how are you doing?
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
There you are.
That's me. Sorry. Get a little juiced up over here. I'm good. Happy Thursday to you. Excited for this one. Running it back with a crew from, I know Sly slid in. That's a mouthful for Jen Cassidy, but we had Will and Casey. Was that last year? Same time?
Yeah, it was last year, same time. Then also we had an update in early July to kind of recap the first half. So we'll jump in with them in just a second. I am going to bring up Sly here in a moment because I want to go ahead and get through everything with the with the most up-to-date data on pre-leasing, and then we'll jump in with these guys and talk a little bit about maybe some of their thoughts on that, but also want to be able to provide a good update to everybody on where things are at for a 2025 pre-leasing so far. So you ready to jump into that?
I am ready as I'll ever be.
I want to bring Sly on really quick too, since this is more operational discussion, and he's probably got some insight into that.
You mean the same Sly Brandon that is a Pulitzer winning author?
That's the one. Sly, you want to introduce yourself really quick?
Absolutely. Thanks, Charlie. I'm Sly Brandon. I am the Vice President of Operations at Cardinal Group. Been in student housing for a very long time. First job was a maintenance tech back in 2001.
Well, thanks for joining today. Yeah, Jen Cassidy was kind of keyed in for this one, but she had a family emergency that came up yesterday and right before our prelim call. So thanks so much for sacrificing some time that I'm sure you probably had slanted to spend with family or getting ready for the holidays. So thanks for joining us. Hey, with that being said, Charlie, you want to jump into it?
Absolutely. All righty here. So taking a look regionally, and I guess nationally as well. National pre-lease about 40%, 39.7, about 2.5% behind. Obviously, kind of ebbs and flows here, depending on holidays. I think most students are out at the current moment for winter break. So definitely a little slower normally along the leasing front. But we're definitely seeing some strong leasing there. The Midwest and the Southeast continue over the last couple of years to be kind of the bellwether here in from a velocity standpoint. The Southwest maybe a little bit behind where it typically is, about 3.5%, 3.7% there. But ultimately, I think, if we're putting the context behind this, which I think we have on one of the bottom slides, potentially, I'm not entirely sure what my team sent over, but the last 3 years, the velocity has been very, very, very strong. First half in I guess against second half is the best way to think about it. I would say, things that we're seeing here on the data side specifically, a lot of your, and we'll talk about this with Will and Casey here about investor preference, but the urban markets seem to be still having a little bit of pain still from last year as well. So I think your bigger municipalities where there's a large school in there, the Atlantas, Minneapolis is, name your big city. Austin's actually doing exceptionally well, but generally speaking, still seeing a little bit of challenges due to that supply that came online on the conventional side of the world. So pre-leasing still relatively strong, 2.5%. Again, we're early in the cycle, but last year was hot out of the gate, even off of the record-breaking year 22. Some slowdowns towards the second half, March, April, May, due to some of the FAFSA challenges, I believe, kind of slowed things down, but picked back up. So
yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, because we were ranging about this time last year, 1 to 1.5, depending on, if you looked at the end of, November versus halfway through December or whatever. And it was really January where we started falling directly in line with what the fall 23 lease up was.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was, towards the end of February, everybody saying, what's going on? Where are the students? So
it's really hard to understand this narrative. A lot of my colleagues at other shops all talked about how they were going to be fast out the gate with launching the renewals for pre-leasing in September, which normally that happens in the month of October, depending on the market. But if that's the case, and the overall average is down by almost 2.5 points, it really kind of changes the entire narrative of what's actually happening and what's going to happen in the winter months.
Yeah, and I did see some slower out the gate. I think beginning of last year, it was if you hadn't started by October, you were behind, and I think there was still some markets that were in that 88 to 92 range that was like, hey, how is this really going to be? Is this really going to track, and kind of get their basis around them, and weren't so hard out of the gate as much. So I definitely see that, and then also Florida. I know coastal regions, we've had some hurricanes that slowed down some things. But, generally speaking, I think, plus or minus a few percentage points here and there, it's relatively in line. If this was 5, then there's definitely some issues there. But I mean, we're seeing there's a handful of markets out there that are 15% ahead. Oxford, Mississippi is one that comes to mind. So ultimately, we're looking pretty strong here. Even again, we're coming off of 3 unprecedented years, really, of strong fundamentals, and continuing to see some outsized, rent growth, 4.5% here. Again, I have a slide here, I know at the very end, that kind of breaks this down over the last 4 cycles. But still seeing, yes, this is probably more helpful. But you can kind of see how the velocity really changed. The purple line there in the middle was the 22, I guess, lease up for 23, 24. And I mean, unprecedented, kind of velocity from a standpoint of pre-leasing as well as rent growth, which was a lot of that pent up in line with, I guess, the broader multifamily sector. So, still, I would say, and again, a lot of the things we're going to talk about with Will and Casey is I don't think there's many sectors in commercial real estate that can still say, hey, we still have opportunities for, strong outside rent growth, and supply and demand drives it. We're down 30% year over year, 30% over the last 5 years now on supply. I think we delivered pre-COVID about 54,000 beds, and it's now right around 38,000 is the average of the last 5 years. So you're definitely seeing, with that, enrollments at a lot of your tier 1, tier 2 institutions have gone up. So definitely seeing the supply demand fundamentals continue to be strong, and a lot of optimism, even amidst some of the high interest rate environments that we thought would creep down. But again, I'm not the expert on that. We'll save that. Sly, for what you're experiencing, and I know Cardinal, with 85, 90 plus thousand beds now, nationwide, is there any trends that are kind of standing out to you as it relates to, I would say not necessarily just velocity, but as it relates to just, is this feel any different than years past? When I say years past, really the last two.
It's really hard to tell. Like I said prior, Cardinal got in line with everyone else, and we mainly launched a lot of our renewal pre-leasing efforts a month earlier. And so we definitely, saw a significant uptick in terms of the performance if you compare it to YOY. One thing that we are seeing is normally our pipelines are a tad bit, more full around this time. And so our pipelines are kind of lagging just a tad bit. And we can't really understand if that's just what's happening within the overall space of housing, and or if there's something else that's more focused on the market itself.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And it's funny, Wes brought up LeaseCon. I think one of the things that we spoke about on the panel that I was on is that the renter experience and the information and, how good technology has been to, they may not have to apply to get 95% of the information. So they're getting smarter, one. And two, I think there's a handful more options now, especially with, a lot of your urban markets and just broader conventional markets in general. Definitely looking at options. And again, I think there's a lot of positives there. I'd be curious to see what traffic looks like to websites and better understand exactly what that is. But I definitely see a change in just speaking with, different groups, whether it's, large like Cardinal, smaller on, on the regional or local operator side, depending on the market, obviously. There's definitely a little bit of change in how things are happening. And, is it all digital? Is it all, how you're reaching these people? Or is it back to, I think one of the things we spoke about was back to the basics and having people go on campus and hand out pieces of paper, which is, I know in modern era, a little strange, but definitely I'd say the renter are getting smarter because they have a lot of the information, and a testament to some of the technology tools that are making that easier.
Definitely.
Hey,
sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say it was great looking at those trends, over the past 4 cycles, with rates from a regional perspective. Anything here you wanted to point out, either one of you guys?
Looking at 4.5 definitely makes me optimistic. 994 compared to where we were last year is what a $44 bump. I think that's promising. I think for us, we really look at where this is going to go post MLK Day. We'll have a better understanding of what the appetite is and what those students are willing to pay, once they come back to break.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I think you normally see some big pops after the holiday where, it's chatted around the table during holiday festivities if little Sally hadn't found a place to live next year. So, and I think the beauty of it now is like, well, hey, here's, pulling up my phone, here's where I want to. And, mom and dad or the guardians can dig through. And it's funny, I was looking at a rendering the other day and it looked like, I thought it was actually built. Like, it's getting so good. So definitely curious to see how that happens. I think Wes, I think you mentioned this in the pre-call we had, the FAFSA application process fiasco has been somewhat, I mean, call it resolved from a standpoint of the technological issues?
Yeah. If you're not following that, because they even said over the summer, look, FAFSA was still not fixed, and that was and there's still some components that is not working, but I believe it was at the end of October. I think it was in November. I have to go back and look at the dates, but originally that would always come out at the 1st of October, so folks could start applying. And they thought it was going to be December again this year. They went through some beta tests, and it was good enough that they could go ahead and release it. There's still a couple of things that they're working on, that they're well aware of, that they said should be fixed by the 1st of the year. So, so I think we're back on track. We'll get something from should get something from the DOE if probably around the end of this year with the inauguration and everything. I don't know exactly when it's going to happen, but it should happen at the beginning of the year to kind of see year over year where they're at. And I expect that number to be no one's really going to compare it to next year. They're going to compare it to 2 years ago. And we'll see what that looks like.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, and I think that was one of the big things that kind of slowed down that latter half of the leasing cycle. But from a standpoint, Wes, to your question, is there anything that stands out? I mean, truly not that much. I mean, I think you're seeing, some normalized levels at your larger floor plan types. And Sly mentioned, and he's like, what are they willing to pay? I think that's pretty much in line with kind of historical averages around the 3% range. But again, your larger unit types, I think there's continued demand for, saving, from a 3-bedroom to a 1-bedroom nationally, you're about 40% savings. I think that's definitely something that we've seen, especially last year. A lot of your larger unit types definitely leasing up quicker. Things that were left on the shelf were, 1 studios, maybe a couple 2-bedrooms here and there, but again, all at higher price points. And one thing that's key, and Sly, I'm not sure if this is not something we talked about in our pre-call, but one of the things that we have seen is, you kind of have 2 buckets for students on their preferences. It's you're either pedestrian, like truly pedestrian, you can walk, or you're going to have to, you're 0.5 miles away or further, and you're going to have some mode of transportation to get there. Seeing a lot more velocity, in that 1 to 2 mile range, because they can save a handful of dollars, or they still have to commute in some way, shape, or form to campus, versus kind of being in that limbo phase there at the kind of the 0.5, 0.75 from campus. Not sure if there's anything that you've noticed, but that's something in the data that I've definitely seen.
Yeah, I think a lot of students these days, they're in charge of curating their own experience. And that means that they can decide if they want to walk to campus or if they're willing to pay, a tad bit less to live a little bit further out. We've also seen students that are more upperclassmen that might not want to be close to campus. Maybe, they want some space. And so there's a lot of different reasons, but I think at the end of the day, it's the students being able to be in charge of kind of what that experience looks like for them.
Definitely.
Sly, one thing that was discussed from a few folks, and it was actually in our ShopTalk Executive Summit that was the day after LeaseCon, TurnCon. I just want to, kind of get your feedback on what you're seeing, not necessarily with Cardinal, but maybe just what you're seeing in the field. But there were several comments made of, hey, the past, especially 2 cycles, at least at this time, it was a lot of the, CAs, leasing agents, leasing interns, were almost like, inside sales folks, right? there was not a whole lot that, had to be done from a marketing standpoint. I don't want to say a whole lot, but it was very lax compared to, what we saw, pre-COVID, right? Or I should say pre-2022. And a lot of these folks said, that, hey, we've actually had to go back and look at, how are we training? And because there were a lot of, staff that have just kind of said, hey, I don't have to do a whole lot to get folks to come in the door. Just kind of curious from your standpoint and what you're hearing and seeing, is is that something that there needs to be some tweaking on? And I don't know if that falls into why we're seeing a 2.7% decrease from last year, but just kind of curious as to your thoughts.
Yeah, of course. I think the environment in which we had a traditional leasing routing process is something that doesn't exist anymore. Post-COVID, of course. A lot of our markets are saturated and/or they're becoming more saturated. In those types of situations, we're having to really do a bit more in terms of coaching and challenging our team members to go from A through Z in terms of building that relationship and really closing that actual sale. And we had a lot of markets where we had folks that were used to just answering the phone, and people were very interested in signing leases. I also think that, through COVID, we didn't see as many new deliveries. And so post that, some of these markets, they're dealing with brand new assets that have fresher amenities that kind of make it a little bit more challenging to make the sale. And so we've been really focusing more or less on the coaching part of what we really need to do to make sure our team members feel more comfortable when they're making that sales call and when they're trying to close that lease agreement.
Good point. And folks, I just want to go back and remind everybody, if you've got questions for our panel, we're about to bring 2 more panelists on. Please put a Q in front of it in the chat, and I'll make sure we get that question asked.
Yeah, Wes, I'll throw one thing out. And Sly, I know we talked about this. This is not as much data related as an impact on performance and everything between. But I think one of the common themes I've heard, and again, we spoke about this a little bit, is from a staffing perspective. Again, you're talking, there's a lot of markets where the talent pool, like, Atlanta, a lot of different professionals, but a lot of these smaller college towns or smaller, tier 2 markets, which may not be kind of a hub for talent. Definitely been I ask people, what are the biggest challenges in the lease up cycle this year or moving forward? It's not, supply and demand. It's really just, it's people. What are your thoughts kind of on some of the challenges that you mentioned, not just on the GM side, but even, your LCMs or, some of your intern, I don't know what the correct title is, but the college students working at these properties. Kind of give a few sentences on that if you can.
Of course, in the last couple of years post-COVID, we've seen a pretty large shift in qualified applicants entering student housing. And it's become increasingly more difficult to hire qualified applicants, And so it very well may be due to the gig economy. It also could be, due to the boom in the adjacent industries. So if you're looking at the construction industry, they saw one of the largest job growths in a industry. And then if you look at hospitality is another industry that's very adjacent to us, they also saw a pretty big uptick in people wanting to work in that particular industry. With Cardinal, we really are fighting this approach by leaning into our centralized services model. And this model basically allows us to drive the performance while operating efficiently, regardless of the uncertainty of the labor market. And so we do see a lot of folks that, they have an opportunity to make money on their cell phone. And so maybe they don't want to come in and be a leasing agent, or maybe they don't want to come in and be a community assistant. And that centralized service model really allows us to kind of leverage using those folks that work in a remote location to kind of bridge the gap of those people that we're not able to hire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know we're going to get into that a little bit more. Anything else, Charlie, you wanted to talk about?
Yeah. I just know that's been a big topic of conversation on every combo I've been on in the last, call it 90 days, even kind of from I know Jake Jarman and Alex Rippey and I spoke about it at length at NMHC, as well as on our panel last week at LeaseCon. And I know Sly mentioned that on our call, so I figured the audience probably is nodding their head along of whether it's frustrations or anything in between. So definitely wanted to bring that up to speed. But no, that's the main questions. I know we'll get into kind of thoughts and things when we bring on Will and Casey for 25 and beyond.
Well, let's do that. Will, Casey, welcome back.
Hey guys.
Happy holidays. Glad to be here.
Well, really quick for the folks that may not be familiar with you guys, Casey, we'll start with you. Give us a quick intro.
Hey, yes, Senior Vice President at CBRE, focused solely on student housing. So based in Dallas, but cover the country for CB. Last time I was on this call was a little more formal, and so apologies for slightly more casual look, but we're going to go as a team. We're going to go to a virtual reality center and kill some zombies and dragons this afternoon. So thanks for having me. Glad to be on.
Casey, I'm disappointed in you that you're not dressed up formally. I mean, I put on an actual sweater for this. So
did you get a haircut yet, Charlie? Yeah.
No, we're letting it ride. Rich introduced me as the guy with good hair on my panel last week at LeaseCon. So until that wears off, I'm not getting a cut.
I'm telling you, this is easy, man. I'm just saying, there's something to be said for this.
That's right.
Sorry, Will.
Yeah, Will Baker here. I am Senior Managing Director at Walker Dunlop down in our Birmingham, Alabama office with a massive focus on student housing finance all over the country. Do a lot of build for rent manufactured housing as well, but happy to be here.
Well, thanks, guys. And, like we said earlier, I had the two of you guys on along with Jen Cassidy back in early July to, kind of talk about what the first half of 2024 was like for you guys and your specific areas of expertise within this industry. So wanted to, when I was talking to Jen last month of, hey, should we do a kind of a follow up to that, or, should we just focus on something, completely operations? And she said, we really need to talk about what's happened in the second half. So, and get some insight from you guys, because I know there's been a lot of transactions that have happened. A lot of things have been going on with, at least with the Fed rates. Not that has any impact on Treasury, and I shouldn't say it didn't have any impact, but we'll get into kind of explaining that a little bit and what your thoughts are. But let's just start with that first question. If you could, well, that's not the question I wanted to show. How have your focus areas, operations, finance, and brokerage, within the industry performed through the second half of 2024 compared to the first half? So I don't know if we want to start with operations, or Will, if you want to jump into the finance side.
Sure. Yeah, I'll start off here. Hard to get much worse than 2023. That was 2024 was an interesting year, as you mentioned. Rates, Wes. I mean, yes, as the Fed, those of you that remember, started raising short-term rates toward the fall, around October of 22, which totally pumped the brakes on most transaction activity, because we were just sitting in a really cheap money, super low interest rate environment for a number of years. And all of a sudden that world just stopped and no one knew what to do with it for a while. And so transaction activity was down dramatically for both Casey on the investment sales side and us on the financing side, obviously, as well. Throughout 2023, I think the total number was a little over $5 billion in transaction volume, and debt was way down through all lenders. 24 was sort of the glimmer of hope year. We had a little spike in treasuries, around May, and then it proceeded to just drop dramatically, over 130 basis points on the 5-year treasury from then until call it somewhere around August. So tons of optimism and a lot of activity around that time, which is usually the time of the year when we're busy anyway with student housing, because we get the new rent rolls. Most lenders we work with are in place, cash flow lenders. We're not underwriting future income or future rent. We're underwriting what they're actually collecting right now. So September is really the busiest time of the year for us for student housing financing. And thankfully, it was another great year of rent growth. It wasn't quite to the level of the 23-24 spike in rent, because that was the largest probably in the history of our industry. However, it was still a huge year for rent growth. So a lot of refinance activity, a lot of acquisition activity in that early part of the school year. I will say it slowed somewhat here over the last month. We've of course seen another spike in treasuries, although many of you have seen the news yesterday. The Fed did decrease rates by 25 basis points, which helps you if you're on a construction loan or on a floating rate loan. However, the vast majority of what we do on the student housing finance side is fixed rate financing, usually a 5-year fixed rate loan. So we're more focused on the 5-year treasuries, which are up. The market responded by increasing treasuries. I think there's an expectation that we're going to be maybe a little higher rate environment than we initially thought. There's not going to be as many Fed rate cuts over the course of 2025 than we previously thought also. So, going into the next year, there's still optimism. I think there's a lot of pent up equity ready to be deployed. There is a ton of loan maturities coming in 2025. I think over $10 billion worth of student housing. So that's something to keep an eye on, because there's going to be a lot of borrowers that are going to be forced to do something. You're not just going to be refinancing just because you want to, but you have a loan maturity that you've got to do something. And so hopefully we're not going to see distress related to that. Hopefully most of these loans are going to get to at least a cash neutral, if not a cash out scenario, based on all the rent growth we've seen over the last 2.5 years. That remains to be seen. But it was a good year. It was a good year. And the back half of the year was a good 2024. Thrilled to kind of get out of the depths of 23, which was a really rough one. A good year 24, and I suspect 25 will be even better.
I want to ask you to talk a little bit about treasury and explain that, because we've got a lot of folks in our audience, that don't deal in that world. And I think it's important for them to kind of understand that, because if they're, setting up maybe their owner has come to them and said, hey, maybe they're part of those 10 billion in maturities and they've got to recap or sell or something. And so a lot of that language is going to, be in their world over the next several months. Can you explain to everybody what it is that, how treasuries impact this, and
Sure,
we'll go from there. And I've got I believe this is the 5-year.
The 5, yeah. So the 5's up a little bit today, even more so than yesterday. I think I'm showing 443 on the 5, 458 on the 10. These are critical numbers for what we do. They're a benchmark for industry with regards to interest rates. So the way that our rates work is there's always going to be a spread on top of that treasury, which is the rate that we offer to the market. So call it somewhere between 180 basis points to 210 basis points over that benchmark treasury is the rate that we can offer. So call it in the 6.25 right now, all in interest rates. So rates are a major mover, and typically, and I've been doing this, for 22 years now, which is crazy, but we've not seen this much treasury volatility in my entire career than we have over the last 2 years, which has caused us tremendous issues for us on the financing side, tremendous issues for Casey and all the investment sales professionals out there that are trying to keep their deals together from the time that their buyers sign an LOI to the time they close. Because if you sign it, if you're at a 4% 5-year and all of a sudden rates rise to 443, like we're seeing on the screen here, that's a major mover on what I can offer on loan proceeds. That could reduce your loan proceeds significantly to the point where the IRR and the cash on cash just doesn't work for your buyers anymore. And so then they inevitably go to the sellers and say, I'm sorry, rates are up 40 pips. I've got to drop my price X%. And then therein goes the negotiation. So lots of deals died in 2023 because of all the rate volatility. Some they were able to work it out. Some went on the shelf for 6 months. Maybe they came back if rates went down a little bit. But so my hope in 2025 is that we, even if we're in a higher rate, that they stay where they are so that buyers can make more informed decisions without all the volatility of moving 100 basis points up or down. We just need them to sort of stay in a band of, call it 20, 25 basis points, 30 basis points up or down, so that so there's more certainty and clarity on what your cost of capital is going to be, because you're married to this loan from 5, 7, or 10 years.
Thinking about this. Well, I was just going to say, on the flip side, sellers are looking at the volatility and saying, I don't know if I should sell right now, because rates could be down 50 basis points in a month as quickly as they have come up. And so the volatility is a big problem. And I think what the audience that's not living and breathing this every day, like Will and I are, the issue is these investors are solving to returns based on the yield that Will is talking about, the interest rates that Will's talking about, and a little bit of movement, 0.44% doesn't seem like a lot, but in our world, it creates
Mm-hmm.
massive issues when you're talking about 25, 50, $100 million properties. Sorry, Charlie, go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, no, I was actually going to mention
Oh, go ahead, Wes.
back to Will on the maturities. You know, thinking back 10 years, and yeah, so we're 24, 25, right after, you know, kind of Great Recession, everything's coming back. You know, how much of that is related to that boom that we saw, you know, from 2012 to 2015 that are just now maturing, or have most of those already been recapped?
A lot of them have. That's a good question, though. I have not seen a breakdown with regards to that $10 billion maturities. How much of that is 10-year debt that was placed, you know, back in 2015 versus how much was placed in 2022 with 3+1+1 debt fund deals.
Gotcha.
Debt fund debt. So that was kind of the name of the game in 2022. The debt funds were very aggressive that year. They were offering very high leverage with very skinny spreads. You know, on the conventional side of multifamily, those deals are hurting right now because we were sort of in go-go days, and it was to the moon at that time. And there was so much supply that happened to conventional, rents started to come down. Thankfully, with student housing, it's been the opposite. Rents have gone up dramatically since 2022. So I'm hoping there won't be distress. There may be some, I think, in some smaller markets, some schools and some loans that were done in schools that maybe have 10, 12,000 or less that have not seen the enrollment spike that a lot of the big, you know, brand name schools have seen over the last 2 years. So that's just something to keep an eye on. We have seen some, you know, renovation plays with some guys coming in and buying maybe a student housing deal that's not the greatest location or not the greatest school, and they try to convert it from student housing to market rate. We'll probably potentially see some more of that happening over the next year or two. Yeah, we'll see. I don't know. It's going to be an interesting year with regards to these loan maturities. A lot of it's CMBS. There's some bank maturities coming up, a lot of life insurance companies. And, you know, I think the life cos entering the space on the financing side has been one of the greatest things to happen with regards to variety of debt options for student housing borrowers over the last 2 years. There are so many more life insurance companies in the space now, and they're offering some pretty enticing terms.
Gotcha. Casey, let's go to you with this question.
Yeah. So first half, and I echo a lot of what Will's already conveyed, but first half of the year, the average 5-year treasury, okay, so sticking with that theme and understanding that, was 4.6%. But by mid-September, they were under 3.5%. Okay, you're talking about over 100 basis points or over 1% difference. That's huge in our world. And so the first half was a little bit slower. Total volume, $2.64 billion. Well, second half, we're going to exceed 5. We'll be well north of 5. And even if you exclude the KKR Blackstone $1.6 billion portfolio, we're going to be well above the first half and the second half. A lot of that was driven by the downward momentum in treasuries, getting to that, call it 3.5 level in mid-September. It was kind of a perfect storm. We had 2 unprecedented years of rent growth, 2023, 24, 2024, 25. You get to fall 24. You've had all this rent growth the last 2 years, and finally rates come down significantly in a fairly short period of time. And it kind of felt like the switch flipped on, and it was go time for transactions. There was a lot that got done in that time, and there's a lot even closing like right now. Year-end closings, people are pushing. We had 1 close Monday. We've got 2 closing tomorrow. So I know there's still a lot when the dust settles in January and we're looking back at what actually closed in 24. It's going to be a much larger number, certainly in the second half versus the first half. But a lot of that, was driven by the rent growth. A lot of it was driven by some treasury movement. By the time we got to NMHC, Student Housing Conference in Vegas in October, rates had run up pretty significantly. And it kind of felt like, and Will, I think, would agree, it kind of felt like the wind had been taken out of the sails a little bit as it relates to momentum and volume and future transactions. We're still doing a lot of BOV activities, or putting our valuation analyses together for clients. There's a lot of that going on right now. People are making decisions, but with what's kind of happened even over the last 2 days in some of this upward treasury movement, sellers are going to have to make a decision on, do I accept this and this goes back to the volatility commentary. Do I accept where treasuries are today and how that affects my value, or am I going to continue to wait for treasuries to come back down to a certain level wherever I want them to be? But I think what was interesting was the first half cap rates were well north of 6 on average. Part of that was the makeup and composition of the assets that traded in the first half of the year. But part of it was the 5-year treasury on average was 4.3%. And second half, the average so far this year, 3.92%, and cap rates were under 5.9 on average. So it makes a big difference when you're talking about, again, $50 to $100 million assets on average.
Yeah. Is this the time I should share your cap rates versus?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, we can, if you've got the chart, I think just for educational purposes, while there's not a direct correlation between treasuries, and this in red here is the 10-year treasury, which a lot of people benchmark to, as Will mentioned earlier. But then you've got multifamily cap rates in green and then student housing cap rates in blue there. And again, while there's not a direct correlation, there is a correlation between the two and the movement over a long period of time. So these are annual numbers. It's not going to be quite as volatile as it would be if we showed it quarterly or monthly, but I think this shows the trend line of how they're correlated and why keeping up with interest rates is important to understand as it relates to values of commercial real estate assets.
A lot of negative leverage out there.
Yeah, so that's a good point too. So historically, if you see here with 2018 being the exception, cap rates historically have been higher than your 10-year treasury. I think what's happened in recent years is you've had some rent growth both in multi and in student recently that's helped investors climb out of negative leverage. Negative leverage just means that your return, at least initially at the time of acquisition, is lower than your interest rate. That's not really a place that investors want to be. But if they've got a reason, they're looking at next year's rent roll. Right now, they could be looking at the fall 25 rent roll and how pre-leasing is going to a certain asset and saying, okay, I may be buying at neutral or negative leverage today, but I'm going to be positive by the time I get to August, so I'm not that worried about it. We've had a lot of that going on over the last 2 years, and that's helped propel volume.
Got it. Brandon, excuse me, Sly. I don't know why I called you Brandon.
Your first name.
Other than it's your last name. But yeah.
Your first names. I would say, in the first and second quarters, things seem to be tracking with 2023. However, towards the beginning of Q3, we began to see a larger variance as it relates to pre-leasing, which really forced us to change our approach. And that change really involved a multitude of different initiatives and really can be distilled down to focusing on that brand promise to our residents and the future residents, of course. But as it relates to the second half of the year, we outperformed our initial goal, but we were basically in line with the industry averages. And we were in a situation that it made us cautiously optimistic regarding 25-26 leasing. That to really say, looking back at Charlie's chart, we're somewhat in the rear by 2.5. And we hope to make up that ground as an industry as we head into the winter months.
Gotcha.
For sure. Can I pepper these guys with some questions?
Yeah.
Before you do that, Charlie, I don't know if you were aware, but the University of Oklahoma and Texas and Casey's Aggies are in the Southeastern Conference. So if you kind of loop that state into the Southeast region, I'm curious how much that moves the needle on the Southeastern pre-leasing numbers.
Well, if and when Texas gets a win against a real SEC football team,
I like that. I like that.
Oh, ouch.
Yeah. So no, I mean, I think you're in an interesting situation again. So all three of the markets you just mentioned, minus Norman, are seeing some pretty decent supply still. I know College Station saw its first wave of deliveries. I know there's a handful more next year and the following. Austin, Texas, West Campus continues to see. I think there's a couple leasing up this year and then a couple more next year and the following. So definitely seeing some some supply come into the market, but also I feel like the conventional market, picking on Austin, you've kind of gotten even with what it costs per bed if you break, a unit rent in half for a student though. But, Casey, as you talk about the investment sales side, and then, partly this over to Baker too, when you talk about volume, I know I've seen there's been a handful of, and just to clarify for everyone, that roughly $7.5 billion mark, that's straight asset sales. That's not recapitalizations. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And for additional context, last year was around 5. I think Will mentioned that earlier. So obviously the trend line's up.
Yeah, definitely. And, from a standpoint of your I wouldn't say deals that are transacting, but more the buyer persona. We talk about, a lot of the, I'd say new entrants, right? I field those inquiries too. What's different about, I'd say about the buyer pool this year as potentially in the couple of years past? I mean, I think, we've seen strongest fundamentals. I mean, you're still seeing rent growth, occupancy still high, right? If there was an imbalance there, you'd see one of those numbers go down, but you're still seeing pretty steady occupancy with continued rate growth. Kind of talk me through what that buyer profile looks like.
We continue to have new entrants into this space. That's been a trend for years, especially in the last couple of years as fundamentals have outperformed other asset sector or other property types, and people are looking for ways to find yield and diversify. I think what you're going to see when the dust settles in 24 is there've been a lot more institutions that have either jumped back in or jumped in for the first time in our sector on the acquisition side. So you're going to see an increase in institutions, but the most active groups the last 2 years really have been private capital and then your discretionary funds. They've got the money raised. It needs to be put to work. And they've been active in doing that at a time where not everybody's been as active. The funds really stepped into an area where maybe historically the institutions have played, and they've been able to acquire assets that maybe historically they've been priced out of, but they've done a nice job. And I think because of the pressure to put that money to work, and you're looking at, we'll talk more about it in a minute, but you're looking at other sectors, office, retail, and even multifamily is some pretty benign fundamentals there, questionable fundamentals. People are looking for, alternatives to put money to work.
For sure. Will, do you have any thought similarly, on the finances?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's been more non-student buyers entering the market over the last few years than I've ever seen before. Some of it is the renovation play move from student to market to conventional, but a lot of it is just they see the yields, they see the outperformance of student housing relative to conventional multifamily and other asset types, and they're attracted to it. And that's what attracted some of the sovereign wealth funds and and all the big the KKRs, the Brookfields, and those type players to the space before. But it's getting people's attention. So the buyer pools are a bit wider now with some new faces to this space. With regards to the agencies, Fannie Mae's really taken a step back in student housing. I'd say they're not as active as they have been traditionally over the past couple of years. They're still active in their structured team with credit facilities, and they've got some big borrowers in that space. However, Freddie Mac has really picked up the slack and done a lot of business this year, especially. They're blew past what they did last year and the year before already. So they're over $2 billion in student housing debt this year. In addition, and so it's really, in my opinion, Freddie Mac and life insurance companies as the two best options right now moving forward.
And then Freddie, one of the agencies, the agencies increased their caps for the 25 year in expectation that volume is going to increase next year relative to this year.
Excellent. Yeah. And I think that's a good parlay into kind of the future side. I mean, so Sly, kind of jumping over to you on the, I know CGI has bought a ton of assets here and more recently. I know there's a couple, picking on the Oklahomas of the world. I guess they got a good quarterback I saw in the transfer portal, but Norman, Oklahoma, Stillwater. I know there's another one in Knoxville. I mean, you guys have still been active on the acquisition front as well. And a lot of those, whether that's, I think Casey mentioned, some JV partnerships or some platform type investments. Any thoughts on kind of the opportunities side? So not as much on the brokerage, but more on the what's interesting from a standpoint of the acquisition front?
Yeah, I can say this. I spend approximately 100,000, miles flying from market to market, really trying to understand not only our people, but what the market is actually doing, what our comps are doing. And what I can say is we look at opportunities that make sense for our investment profile. And you go to these markets and you start looking at how the assets are ran, and you're looking at not only the institution itself, but you're looking at fast flow. You're looking at how well that institution did from a NCAA standpoint as well, and it really starts to paint a picture of where the opportunities may lie. So for us, you talked about Oklahoma. We saw a lot of good opportunities for us to enter that market. And it had a lot to do with those things that I talked about, but a lot of it is really just looking at what that investment profile is and what's going to make the most sense.
No, great questions, Charlie. There's a couple of things that I want to get to, and this next one, I think you guys have pretty much hit on it, at least Casey and Will, as far as most impactful. Sounds like obviously how volatile the rates are is probably going to be the main thing. So I want to throw it to Sly really quick and just say from an operations standpoint, what's on your list? I know you sent me a couple of items you wanted me to show.
I think the first thing that I really want to talk about is second and third quarters. There was a lot of chatter as it relates to fast flow. And I think that that did have an impact, and that varied, based off of timing and market and asset type. But if you really start to look and focus on the labor market, and we compare the data to the construction, hospitality, multifamily sector, multifamily's dead last in terms of job growth. So if you look at the construction sector, they are projected to increase faster than any other sector in the next 10 years. A lot of folks say that that's indicative of what happened through COVID, and there was a lot of stuff that was stuck in the pipeline and folks are not able to build. A lot of that stuff is coming out and being put into these markets the next 10 years. And because of that, they're seeing a large growth of jobs. And on the property management side, we need maintenance. Maintenance is a huge part of how we operate our assets. And so we are seeing some of those folks find higher paying jobs or jobs that typically lead to a better lifestyle for that individual, kind of matriculate to the construction industry. Now, if you look at hospitality, it's basically the same exact thing. They are experiencing the same type of growth. They're looking to add approximately 1.9 million jobs in the next 10 years as well. A lot of folks think this is also indicative for the recovery from the pandemic. But if you look at the hospitality industry, and I've had multiple conversations with brokers and the folks in finance, we are one of the only industries that we heavily rely on 18 to 25-year-olds to, manage multi-million-dollar assets. And from a traditional standpoint, that has worked extremely well. But again, post-COVID, we've definitely seen a shift in qualified individuals that want to work in student housing. And then we think that's a huge part because of what's happening with the gig economy and these other industries that are basically absorbing some of those folks that normally would kind of make their way into student housing.
But let's be honest, 18 to 25-year-olds have never been very qualified to do a whole lot anyway. And no offense to anybody that's 18 to 25 in our audience, but we've been able to find really good employees, and the operators have, and I think still are great at training them. There's just a mentality difference, and it's not a generational thing. It was definitely a COVID gig economy thing that's happened, and we got to figure out how to get good folks.
Yeah, really to fight that approach, I think you had that slide up, Wes, for centralized services. We've really focused on the client experience, the customer experience, and also the Cardinal experience. And what that really means is we're trying to find opportunities to drive the performance of the real estate while also increasing our efficiency of operating these assets. And by doing that, we're able to kind of find the sweet spot of not being able to hire as many qualified applicants at each asset versus we have this office, whereas we have these individuals that are the best at what they do, and they're able to manage more assets than, a typical leasing agent. And so, for us, we feel pretty confident that between the talent that we do have on site and our centralized, service model, we'll be able to rise to the occasion and continue to hit those marks.
Great. All right. So the last 5 minutes that we've got here, I want to get into talking about 2025 and what is everyone's boldest prediction for the industry in 2025. Who wants to start us off?
I'll start us off, Wes. So we were, as Casey and I have mentioned, a little over $5 billion in sales in 23, a little north of 7.5 this year. We're going over 10 in 25. Capital markets will settle down. We'll have a little more clarity, and those $10 billion in loan maturities will certainly help with move that.
I hope you're right.
Will's going big. I think I'm going to be a little bit of a contrarian on occupancy and where it's headed. I know it's trended downward last couple of years. I think people have been really strategic and conservative out of the gates. I know maybe we're behind looking at what Charlie's got out this year, but I'm going to predict occupancy is actually going to tick up above fall 24 when we get to fall 25. I think when the dust settles into the leasing cycle, people are going to find ways to fill beds. I think people were all caught off guard last year, and because they were overshooting on rates and they were caught off guard with some of the velocity and kind of running out of kids once they got to the summer. And I don't think they're going to make the same mistake this year.
Yeah, there's a good question that, and I know we've got just a couple minutes here, and Brandon, if you're able to stay on, because it's really kind of geared more towards you, that TJ Chambers has got in the comments that we'll get to. But biggest prediction, boldest prediction.
Yeah, I would tend to agree that this upcoming year is definitely going to be better than last. I think a lot of shops and properties got caught off guard. I think the FAFSA definitely was part of that narrative. But once you got into the summer months, it definitely didn't turn out as well as we all thought it would. And we found ourselves fighting for the same exact type of resident. And so I think people are going to be a bit more savvier going through the winter months and also spring and also summer. I think folks really playing that rate game will be a little bit more conservative to make sure that they can hit those occupancy numbers going into fall.
Gotcha. Charlie?
I've stayed optimistic the last 36 months now. I mean, I think the fundamentals and to what Casey said, I do think occupancy will tick up. I think ran out of steam there to make the changes and react when they did, when some did, and probably some of the reason why we saw some drops there. But I would also, in speaking with a lot of, people on the investor side of the coin, there's a lot of pent-up equity. I think velocity is going to be good, but from a supply demand standpoint, I mean, you're still down 30% on deliveries. I mean, some of the initial fall 2024 enrollment data is going out, and there's still 150, 200 basis point jumps at a lot of these big institutions. So until there's a change in supply and demand imbalance that we have right now, like I'm pretty excited about the next 24 days. I think it's going to be a strong year. I think people learned their lesson last year as it relates to reacting and being proactive versus reactive, as Sly mentioned. But no, I remain optimistic.
Well, great. And Rich Kelly with France Media sends this message to you guys. Really good and interesting commentary from all speakers. Well done. I appreciate it, everyone. Sly, I heard someone's Zoom go off. Are you able to stay on for just a few minutes? We'll talk about TJ's question here.
Yeah, of course.
All right. Guys, stay on if you can. If you got to run, I appreciate it. But
I've got to run. Thanks for having me. Happy
Thanks, everyone.
holidays to
Hey,
everyone.
for the holidays, everybody.
Happy
Thanks so much.
holidays.
All right, take care.
All right, let's jump into this really quick. How are operators adjacent to larger MSAs dealing with local conventional properties where saturation levels and rates have dipped to be competitive and in line with the by the bed product offering different lifestyles and amenities than traditional purpose-built student housing?
Big question. Thank you, TJ, for that one. I think there's two big things that you really have to do. And the first thing is you have to be sober that this is a thing and it's not going to go away. And so the way you either react to it and or adopt it is going to be the deciding factor of what happens with that particular deal. But giving you a little bit more specific.
Tactical.
Yeah. This just happened to us in a few urban markets. And we basically had to start over from a marketing approach. We had to change the profile of residents that we typically go after to really understanding.
And let me just name a couple of those markets that are fresh in my memory. If you got more you want to add, feel free. Berkeley is one I heard a lot about this year. Charlotte, Dallas, and Denton was another one that I saw this quite a bit with. So yeah, those larger MSAs as TJ mentioned.
Yeah, another one would be Tempe.
And Tampa.
Yeah, Tampa. One thing that we really focused on again was getting sober, and the way we did that is we looked at the residential profile. Who's our ideal resident that typically would create and find value in living at our asset? And so we really kind of leaned into living at this particular asset. What value does that create? That's number one. And once you can identify exactly the experience and the value prop that you're going to offer to those residents, then it's pretty simplistic to kind of understand what type of resident you're going after. And then when you do your research, you kind of know how many of those residents might exist within that market. And then once you know how many people are in that market, then you can really start to put together your marketing approach of how you're going to get those folks in the door. But what is it that you need to close those individuals, right? Mm-hmm. And these things happen in real time. And I think last year what was happening is the fundamentals of the market were extremely strong. And so there were a lot of assets that they just kept the original marketing plan. They kept the original profile of resident that they were looking for. And they assumed that, at some point those residents would find their way back to their asset. And some of those assets never got lucky, right? But again, it starts with just being sober and understanding that, the dynamics of those markets are going to change. And the way you need to address that is by, changing with it quickly.
Do you think, because a little bit of what I'm reading into what you're saying is conventional stole students. So, we've got to steal some of their residents. And so it may expand beyond students as far as the demographic makeup. Am I understanding you right in that?
That's somewhat of the play. I mean, I think it's looking at is your rate plan aligned with the type of residents that are willing to pay for that product in that location. And if you come back and you say, oh, wow, we've priced ourselves out of the market. And so the typical student that was on scholarship or maybe on some type of aid, we've priced them out of the market to basically live here. So then what are some other types of students that we need to go after? And if those students are still within that market, then what can I basically put together to attract them to my asset? And what do I need to give away to really close that actual lease agreement? The other part too is thinking about what it may look like to attract other type of residents. And you could be in a situation where, you might not have a large pool of residents that are willing to pay, that price for that product. So you may be in a situation where you have to force to scale down that rate plan, or you may look at, do we have young professionals in this market? Do I create a marketing plan to go after that? I mean, I've seen that a lot too. Of like, hey, we're going to stick with the rate plan, and we need to find a way to really, hit this number. And you have to be creative in the way that you approach that. But a lot of that could be younger folks that just graduated college that still may be in the market, that may not be ready to have a apartment, all to themselves. They may still want a roommate situation. Okay, well, how can we market ourselves to be able to attract those types of residents, and what do we need to do to close those?
Yeah. Are you seeing any of those assets? Are you seeing where you're at the point where you're having to talk about maybe reducing the number of 4.4s and doing some conversions in order to reach those folks?
I think globally, we've definitely have had conversations that allow the community to be better, more competitive in the marketplace, and those conversations are happening. But we find again that if we're able to take a step back and we're being extremely sober within the time that we have left through, the end of August, does that allow us to absorb the market share that we need to hit our goal? But if it's June or July and we're still trying to figure it out and we're scratching our head, that has to be probably part of the narrative of what's going to make the most sense for us to really lease this property to a certain number and then get back to the basics that following year. So you may look at a property that has 5s and 6s, and you may say, hey, if we close or lock a door or two in a 5 or 6, does that make us more competitive to really absorb more of that market share that may be looking for 3s and 4s?
Awesome. Hey, thanks for sticking around and answering that question. TJ, thanks for asking it. With that being said, our next Shop Talk is going to be in 2025 on January 16th. So make sure that you put that on your calendar. And again, if we've brought you any value today, and I hope that we have, please tell your colleagues about Shop Talk and make sure that they get registered. They can do that by going to shoptalk.info. You can also go there and see all the previous Shop Talks that we've done before. This one will be posted there shortly, and it will also be on the Student Housing Insight YouTube channel. So you can go check it out there as well. Brandon, again, thanks so much, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Wes.
All right. Happy holidays, everyone, and Happy New Year.